I am the chess strategist, and today we're going to win another chess game. Hey, what's up, guys? It is the chess strategist back with another video, and today we are going to be playing, of course, another episode in our rapid speed run. We are going to be playing 10 plus 5 rapid, so let's just get right into it, guys. And yesterday we did have a game in the Italian opening. It was a very interesting game where our opponent was able to hold on for a little while, but they ended up making a blunder and we won the game. So today we're going to see if we can get a similar game. We have the black pieces against the lion dog. Good luck to our opponent. We're going to see if they play e4 or if they play d4. We faced a lot of d4. Oh, our opponent's deboarded, so we're going to go on to a new opponent. And we're going to see whether we get the white pieces and the black pieces again. And we get the black pieces again against Christoph. Our opponent plays e4, and we are going to have our first time playing the black pieces against e4 in the speed run. And we are going to be playing the Sicilian almost exclusively against e4, and that is the move c5. Our opponent responds with the Alpine Sicilian. The Alpine Sicilian is when our opponent plays e4, and then we play c5, the Sicilian, and our opponent then plays c3, the Alpine Sicilian. Now, there's two different ways to respond to the Alpine. You can play d5, or you can play the move we play, knight f6. Now, both the ideas of these two moves are to attack the e4 pawn. You cannot allow your opponent to play d4 and maintain their e4 pawn. So we forced our opponent to advance their pawn to e5, and we go with the only move, knight to d5, putting our knight in the center of the board. And now our opponent does play d4 immediately. And this is a lot of theory, so I'm going to explain it more of it after the game, but the move here is to take. And then when our opponent retakes with the c3 pawn, we are going to have to challenge the center immediately with d6. We don't want to allow this pawn to be very active. We want to challenge it immediately, and our opponent decides to develop his bishop. Now, there's a few different moves here. You can play e6, or you can move your knight to b5 or b6, creating an attack on the bishop. So that's what we're going to do. Is we're going to move our knight back, and we're going to see where our opponent puts his bishop. A lot of time they do give this check on b5. And our opponent is playing some theoretical moves here. We are getting a very theoretical, well-explored position here. But there aren't very many moves, so it's very common that opponents know these kind of moves. Know these common moves in positions like the Alpine, which are very tense. And our opponent has decided to drop his bishop back, and we can take here and exchange queens and go into a very equal position. Or we could play for a little bit more. I like the idea of first developing our knight here, and then seeing if our opponent wants to advance his pawn. Now, advancing the pawn does not seem very good to me. I don't think it would be wise for our opponent to do that. Of course, it would just blunder this pawn. So what we're going to do is just develop our knight, and maybe force our opponent to decidedly take, or see what our opponent's going to do. And he decides to develop his knight, of course. Now here, a move we can do is we can just pin his knight. We want to create an attack on this pawn. And one way we can do that is by developing our bishop and reducing the effectiveness of this knight, because it is now going to be pinned. So we can attack his knight, threaten the exchange here, and forcing his queen maybe to capture. Of course, he would not want to double his pawns. And then we can play this nice move e6 that we're planning to play in pretty much every position anyways. And here our opponent has blundered his pawn. So, as you can see here, we've got 1, 2 attackers, and we've got one indirect attacker pinning this knight. So now what we can do here is take, because he's got an attacker here that's going to defend the pawn, and we've got one here, and if he takes, he loses queen. So he's forgotten about the move we just made on the last turn. He's decided to develop his knight instead of focusing on the threat that we made. And our opponent here goes for the tactic. The tactic bishop takes f7 is available in a lot of these positions. And here he's going to try to develop his knight like this. And let's see. When we take here, he attacks here, he takes up our bishop, and we still win a pawn. I'm not too worried about this. So in this position, we've just exchanged our bishops, but we still win the pawn. We can even correct our pawn structure if we'd like. We can also threaten a queen trade. We can correct our pawn structure. We can threaten a queen trade like this. Or we can take with the knight and have a strong knight in the center of the board. There's many different options here. And there's a strong checkmate threat on this square. We have to be careful of that. We don't want our opponent's queen being allowed onto that square. So maybe we do take with the knight here, disallowing our opponent to infiltrate through these light squares. Also threatening the fork here. And this is the kind of position you get in Sicilian. Very double-edged positions, where you've gained material or you've sacrificed material in order to expose your opponent's king to an attack. Here we've decided to go for something a little bit more testing, and we have to see if our opponent is going to make the correct move. Now, of course, this move, h6, always comes to mind in these kind of positions. But I would like to control this square. I don't want his knight to be able to use this square. So what we're going to do is offer an exchange of queens here. Now that our queen is controlling this diagonal, our opponent is not going to be able to use this square nearly as actively. And he decides to exchange queens. And we take with the rook. Okay, and our opponent has decided to play knight to b3. Knight to b3, very interesting move. Now, there's a few different things we can do here. One move I really like is just leaving this knight here. We could, of course, give the check, which is an option. And our opponent has defended. This bishop is very well defended. We're not winning this bishop by any means. We can advance our knight as well, but this knight is on a square where if we take, we can gain this pass pawn in the center of the board. It's going to be protected as well by this pawn. So this exchange of knights is not really something that we should be afraid of per se. It's a decent exchange of knights. It's not something that I'm worried about really. What I would like though is to disallow his knight from coming to this square. So what we can do is first knock his knight away. As you can see here, he's got a few squares. He can't go here, can't go here, can't go here. He can go here, here, or here. So he's going to go one of these squares, probably F3. And from F3, there's a few different things we can do. Let's see what he goes for first. He does go to E4, which I think is probably the least prudent of the moves he could have played. I think it's probably the worst move he could have made. Not a terrible move, but I think F3 probably would have been better. And let's see here. What opportunities? Now, of course, we can make this move and force him to move his rook over. But I don't think that threat is something that's too strong. It's a one-move threat. He can move his rook over, and then there's no threat left. There's nothing really left for him. We can also double his pawns, but I'm not too worried about doubling his pawns. I don't think it's that big of a deal for him. I'd rather just get our pieces developed, really. Getting our pieces developed is a good idea in pretty much any position. And this bishop is really looking sad. How are we going to develop this bishop? Well, I'd like to develop this bishop once he exchanges his knights in the center of the board. So one thing I could do is develop my knight here to F3. Or not my F3. My king to F7. Develop my king to F7 so that when he takes, and we can play this move, our king is one square able from defending this pawn, and our bishop's going to be able to come out, and our rook's going to be able to come out, and we're going to have all our pieces developed. Granted, the other piece that needs improving is this knight. This knight is not too good, but it's not really got a stable place to go for now. And our opponent is keeping the tension. They want to keep the tension as long as possible, it seems. They don't want to allow an exchange of pieces immediately. So we are going to continue with our own development. We should be advancing our pawns so that our bishop can develop. So I'm liking just playing E6. Of course, we could fianchetto this bishop, which wouldn't be too bad. I like the stronghold that we're going to be creating here, this stranglehold on this square, disallowing our opponent from advancing this F4 break. This F4 break that would be very dangerous for us because of the opponent's piece placement. And here we can drop our knight back. We don't have to allow any sort of exchange here. We don't want to allow him to take and win a pawn. That would be terrible. We can also just develop our bishop here and have a strong pawn in the center. And I think that's probably the move we're going to do. Develop our bishop, defend the pawn, defend this square again, and our rook is going to be able to develop here very soon. And he does take. He gives us a bishop. Gives us this one bishop that's now very strong on this active diagonal, and this bishop has become our strongest piece just in few moves. Our bishop has become the strongest piece that we have, and now we can develop our rook, and wow, our pieces are looking a lot better now. Now we can see our advantage has been transformed. we no longer have all weak pieces. We have strong pieces in the board. We have this bishop defending the pawn, and he is still creating issues for us. So let's not be hasty. We can make a symmetrical move here, knight to c4. He can take. If we take, he'll take with check. So we don't want to allow that. Now, is there any good way for us to defend this pawn here? We can just advance our rook a square. And that would be a decent move. Just to defend our pawn, not create any problems in our position. I think that's probably the best move here. Just advance our rook up. Could advance this rook up, of course. Also preparing possibly to double on this file with the pawn. And he's temporarily disallowed us from advancing. He's blockaded our pawn. Very smart from him. But here he has allowed us to invade with our rook. We're going to get a nice active square for our rook here. Nice strong square on this c2 square where we're attacking this pawn. Not right this second, but this blockade is not going to be moved anytime soon. And he may go for an exchange of rooks. Our idea here is, of course, to add our other rook to the c file and invade along the c file. We can, of course, add more pressure with this move, knight to c4 or knight to a4, adding more pressure on this pawn, which is difficult to defend. And here our opponent is trying to force an exchange of rooks. But I'm not too worried about it. Of course, we can just double up, get this exchange of pieces. And anytime this pawn is under attack, we can just defend it with this pawn. We're not too worried about this pawn becoming weak. And here we've exchanged rooks. We're still going to have this knight moves to attack the pawn. We're not worried about the weakness of this pawn. It's going to be defended, of course. And we're going to have this nasty advance, e4. And our opponent is forcing all of our pieces off the board. I don't think this is a strong idea for him. It really is just forcing his pieces to undevelop and allowing us to get exactly what we want. So we're going to just play this e5 advance immediately and have a strong piece. And these two pawns in the center of the board are really going to be the winners for us. And we're just going to develop our knight here. Our knight could be on a better square. One of the better squares would be this lovely e3 square from which our knight is creating a ton of pressure. These pawns are creating a nice clamp. He's never going to be able to advance. And we're going to be able to move our king up. We're going to have this strong pawn. We're up a pawn. This is going to be a clean conversion. Nice. So we have this nice king, which we're going to move up. And now his king is tied down to this pawn. This knight is super strong. This bishop is now going to be able to be redeployed. It's done its job. It defended this diagonal for the longest time, and now we're going to be able to redeploy it to a more active square. As you can see, it's kind of hemmed in by our own pawns for now, but it is going to be redeployed, and it is going to see the light of day again. It's done its job on that square, and now we need to give it a different job. Move our knight up here, or our king up here, and we have blundered this pawn. But again, I'm not too afraid. We're just going to be able to advance the pawns. And just advance. We're giving up a pawn here, but we just want to get our king in. And getting our king in is the most important thing we can do. with our king. Our king is getting stronger and stronger. His knights are tied down. This knight cannot move. This knight can't really move either. We have a nice active king. We have this nice pass pawn. Now I'd like to force an exchange of knights here. See if he goes for it. Sorry about that, guys. We're going to continue here with just advancing our king. We can move our king over here, even. Attacking this pawn. And he's decided to exchange his knights. And we're just going to move our pawn up. And we can advance our pawn here. And he's just running out of squares. He has really nowhere to go here. He's going to have to take our pawn, and now he's given up his only knight because that pawn was going to promote. We do have this bishop which we can get incorporated into the game. So let's do that as soon as we can. And here the conversion is very clean. We have an extra bishop. He doesn't have any pieces left. We're going to be able to walk over and take these pawns with our king and advance this outside pass pawn. So that's what we're going to do. We walk over, take, take. This king is going to come over. And yeah, this position is very rudimentary. Our opponent, he could resign in this position for sure. But we have to learn how to win these positions, of course. The idea here is to box out his king. His king is going to try to invade, and we just want to be able to keep one pawn at least. And we're just going to shuffle our bishop here. He's created he's created what's called the opposition. So he's controlling these squares that our king wants to go to, and he has to move his king eventually. He's going to advance his pawns, but there's not really much he can do here with advancing his pawns. And now we can invade with our king to a square that we'd like to go to, because he's given up the opposition. And our opponent has managed to convert this into a drawn endgame. I'm going to see if our opponent knows how to draw this. our opponent resigned. Wow. I believe this is a drawn endgame. As you can see here, the way you can tell if this is a drawn endgame is when it's an outside pass pawn is if the bishop is on the opposite color of the promotion square. This promotion square is a white square. Our bishop is dark square bishop. So what would happen here is 4 sequence of moves pretty much. Opponent would walk back here, we'd walk back. Opponent would go here. We would walk over, he'd go here, we would go here. He would go here, we advance, we go up here, we advance, he goes here, we go here. Here, here, here. And we'd shuffle, but we'd have to be very careful not to stalemate him here. It's pretty much a stalemate. We can't force him out of this corner. So we could shuffle and see this is stalemate. So this was a draw, but he actually just played it and resigned. So yeah. Anyways, we get a Sicilian. We get the Alpine Sicilian, and we're going to see here where we deviate from theory. Believe this right here is a very common tactic that happens. Bishop takes f7, and then queen takes, and so we win a pawn here. He gets some compensation. Our king is a little bit weakened, but we are completely equal here. Yeah, this is not losing for black or anything like that. And we force the exchange of queens, knock away his knight, develop our king, and I decided we wanted to develop our bishop to the long diagonal, which is an interesting idea in some cases. Sometimes it's not a great idea though. Here we decide that it is good, and he immediately justifies that by exchanging. And here we got this nice pass pawn. We have nice moves we can play. We can invade with our rooks on the open file. We invade. We exchange all the pieces. We get a nice endgame where we have the pass pawn, and we just have to develop our pieces and advance our pawns and advance everything. And we just keep going, exchange pieces, and we get our king to the other side of the board. And here it's pretty much lost for our opponent. We have a lot of different pieces here, and we just go back and forth. And now see, I did blunder into a drawn endgame here, but our opponent played on and they resigned. So yeah, it was pretty quick here, but yeah, I did make a mistake. Let's see why I blundered into the endgame. So here I could have disallowed my opponent from getting out of this box and won the pawn. What happened here is I just go over, he takes the bishop, and I advance here, and I'm able to get to this square before he can, and that's why it's winning. But since I allowed him to get back to the corner, he's able to hold a draw, but he didn't know that. So that's something we need to make sure we keep in mind of in the future, and in future games we will be able to not allow a situation like that to happen. But yeah, we still get the win. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. It was very instructive, and have a good rest of your day.